welcome to Traditional Painting the Digital Way. This is where I use digital painting apps to teach traditional painting techniques. This is part 3 of my Rainbow Fall series, and it's going to be also the final part. And in this part, we're going to go ahead and add the final touches to the waterfall, rocks, rainbow, and the mist. If you want to follow along with traditional materials, check out part 1 where I have a list of all the paints, brushes, and canvas that I use. The app that we're going to be using is Infinite Painter for Android. And we're going to go ahead and start with the third highlight on the rocks. And I want to use sort of a cadmium orange color for this. And you can use cadmium orange mixed in with white acrylic gesso if you're following along with your acrylic paints. And we want to remember that we don't want to cover up all the dark again on these rocks. You want to go ahead and sort of put it just on the edges of the rocks this time and make sure that you keep all the layers that you've put on there and let them show through this orange layer. And I use my finger to smudge it when I'm using acrylic paint, but you can use a paper towel or a brush, whatever you prefer. And then I want to go ahead and use the Schoolhouse Chalk and Infinite Painter to go ahead and smudge the highlight in. And this just kind of softens the rocks and makes it look more like a rock-like texture on the top when you smudge them in instead of just lines. And again, you want to kind of keep the shapes that you've got for the rocks. You don't want them to look all uniform. You want them to look different because things in nature usually don't look exactly the uniform or exactly the same. So you want to give them an uneven look. And then I want to use sort of a dry brush technique to start adding the highlights to the waterfall. And a dry brush technique is just a brush with not very much water on it and just mostly paint. And you let the layer underneath show through on the top there. And if you're following along traditionally, one of the flat brushes would work, probably a number 6 flat brush. If you want to go even smaller, a number 3 flat brush. And in Infinite Painter, I'm using the dry brush. And you just kind of want to paint the highlights around the rocks and just make it look like there's little streams of water running around the rocks and over them, some of them trickling over them and trickling around. And just use your photo references that you have to see how water behaves in waterfalls. But you want to make sure that you have little streams trickling down the rocks and in and out of them. And here it hits the bottom of the waterfall, and so you have a little bit of a pool, and you want to use kind of banana shaped strokes at the bottom to make it look like ripples and more water running down the rocks, but it won't be quite as steep because it's in the shallow pool there. And then here I'm just kind of using the Vince brush to go ahead and add final, it won't be final, but some more touches to the waterfall. This will be about the third layer. And just kind of closing up some of the gaps in the water there and making it look more like it's trickling around the rocks. And you want to use sort of short, uneven strokes here because you don't want to make it look solid, like a solid sheet. You want to go ahead and make it look rough and uneven. And then I'm using the Pollock brush to go ahead and add the splashes of water down at the bottom of the waterfall. And if you're following along traditionally, you can mix up some thin paint, and you would take white acrylic gesso with a touch of blue and spatter it with a toothbrush on the bottom of your waterfall, and that will give you sort of the effect of splashing water. And then I'm adding the final highlight to the waterfall here using the Velocity Spatter brush, and I'm using a very orange tinted white. So if you're following along traditionally, take your cadmium orange light and put it in some white acrylic gesso and just leave it mostly white, but you don't want pure white because that would look too chalky. And then I'm just adding spatters down and rough, uneven strokes down the waterfall and also at the bottom of the waterfall. You just want it to look like it's splashing water, and there's little rivulets of water running everywhere on the waterfall. And then now we're going to go ahead and add the mist. And you take a really thin layer of water and paint and glaze over the top of your rocks and your underbrush there. And if you're following along with Infinite Painter, you would use the cloudy brush and turn the opacity way down and use kind of a light violet color for your mist. You don't want pure white again. And you can cover up the rocks and the waterfall as much as you want to. You can let some of it show through more than I did if you want to. It just depends on what you want your painting to look like. And then here I'm going to work on the rainbow. And the rainbow is the hardest part because you want to try to make the paint be transparent. So in Infinite Painter I'm using the circle guide to help me get it right. If you want to use maybe some sort of a plate or something if you're following along traditionally, and just kind of draw a chalk mark so that you can have a guideline there, because you want it to look round. You don't want it to look bent or uneven. You definitely want your rainbow to look right. And as we know, if you can see rainbow from the air, they're actually a circle, but we never see it from the ground. And so it always looks like a half circle. So this is what I'm doing, is trying to use the red colors, and I always use the acronym Roy G. Biv for the colors so I can remember them. So you'd use a red shade, and then you would use orange and yellow, and then blue, indigo, and violet. And don't forget green in there. It's red, orange, yellow, G, green, Biv, blue, indigo, violet. And you can follow along with cadmium red and cadmium yellows, cadmium orange, use aquamarine blue, just some of the colors that look really transparent. And you want to use the acrylic glaze brush in Infinite Painter, and make sure you turn the opacity down on it. And if you're doing this traditionally, use a dry brush technique and don't put very much paint on it. And you have to kind of get it right the first time. So make sure that you don't mess up on your rainbow when you're doing it traditionally. Just go ahead and draw it out first, kind of with some white chalk, so that you know how to follow the line. And try not to go over the color again. Try to get it done in one pass. And then I went ahead and signed it, but that doesn't mean that I'm through. I went ahead and worked on the trees again. I thought I'd add a little more detail to the trees, so I took some more dioxazine purple and Hooker's green. You mix those together and get kind of a darker green. And you can go back and work on your mist after you've got it done. So you can go ahead and put the trees in here, and then you'll take your cloudy brush or your glaze of thin acrylic and run it over the top of the trees. And I would point out that you need to let each layer dry before you glaze it, because otherwise it will lift the paint up. So you have to let each layer dry before you run it over with the thin acrylic glaze. And this is working traditionally. And Infinite Painter, just put it on another layer so that you can erase it if you have to. And then I'm working a little bit more on the details on the trees, and then I'm going to glaze it again. And that's how you can actually do a few more details, but the rainbow is pretty much a one-shot deal, especially if you're doing it traditionally. You kind of have to get it right the first time. Otherwise it just loses that transparency. So here I'm glazing the trees again and putting it a little bit over the end of the rainbow. You can make your rainbow brighter if you want to, or you can make it more misty, just whatever your preference is. And here I just wanted this picture to look really misty and like it was really wet there and foggy. So this is the end of my Rainbow Fall series. Stay tuned for a brand new series coming up soon, and hit the subscribe button if you want to see what that is. Thanks everybody for watching, and thank you so much for your support. If you have any questions or any suggestions about what you would like to see me paint next, just leave them in the comments down below. And I will catch you later.